He didn't say much, wore a faded gray uniform, pushed his cart through the same hospital corridors every day for 3 years. The young doctors walked past him like he was invisible. The nurses never learned his name. To them, he was just another old man mopping floors. But when a patient was dying and the medical team couldn't save him, this forgotten 72-year-old stepped forward and did something that left everyone speechless. What they discovered about Marcus Thompson changed everything and reminded an entire hospital what real experience looks like. Welcome to True Hero Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of recognition and redemption, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like Marcus Thompson's deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and your support brings more amazing stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Marcus Thompson woke at 5 a.m. every morning, just as he had for the past 50 years. At 72, his body never forgot 30 years of military discipline. He worked as a janitor at Sacred Heart Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, following the same routine every single day without fail. Thompson's small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city contained only the bare essentials. An old single bed with worn sheets, a small kitchen table with one chair, a refrigerator that hummed too loudly, and a television that rarely worked properly. The walls were completely bare, no photographs, no certificates, no mementos from his past life. Thompson had made a conscious decision to bury his previous identity completely. Every morning, Thompson would shower with cold water to save on the electric bill, eat a simple breakfast of instant coffee and toast, then dress in his standard-issue gray custodial uniform. The plastic name badge that read Marcus Custodial was his only identification in the massive hospital complex. When Thompson arrived at Sacred Heart Hospital each morning at 6:30 sharp, nobody gave him a second glance. The gray uniform made him as invisible as the walls he cleaned. Young doctors in their pristine white coats and nurses in colorful scrubs would rush past him as if he didn't exist, their minds focused on patients, procedures, and medical protocols. Sacred Heart Hospital was one of Boston's largest and most prestigious medical centers. The 12-story building housed over 400 beds, employed thousands of staff members, and treated more than 50,000 patients annually. In this bustling environment of cutting-edge medicine and life-saving technology, Thompson was nothing more than a shadow moving quietly through the corridors. For 3 long years, Thompson had cleaned the same areas every day. He would start in the emergency room waiting area, mopping floors that had seen countless tears, arguments, and moments of desperation. Then he would move to the examination rooms, sanitizing surfaces where doctors delivered both good news and devastating diagnoses. Finally, he would finish his rounds in the intensive care unit corridors, where the line between life and death was thinnest. Thompson never complained about his assignments, never asked for different duties, never spoke about his qualifications or experience. He simply did his job with quiet dignity, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and maintaining the cleanliness standards that kept the hospital running smoothly. To everyone around him, he was just Marcus the janitor, reliable, invisible, and unremarkable. Among the hundreds of medical professionals at Sacred Heart, only a handful ever acknowledged Thompson's existence. Dr. Amanda Rivera was one of the rare exceptions. Rivera was a 29-year-old emergency medicine specialist who had joined the hospital 2 years earlier after completing her residency at Johns Hopkins. Brilliant, dedicated, and compassionate, Rivera made it a point to greet Thompson every morning with a warm smile and genuine interest in his well-being. Rivera had always sensed something different about Thompson, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. His posture was too straight for someone who spent his days bent over cleaning equipment. His vocabulary, though limited in their brief conversations, contained occasional medical terms that seemed unusually sophisticated for a custodial worker. Most notably, during medical emergencies when the entire hospital would erupt into controlled chaos, Thompson maintained a level of calm that seemed almost supernatural. While other staff members would show signs of stress during crisis situations, elevated voices, rapid movements, visible tension, Thompson would continue his work with methodical precision. Rivera had noticed that he seemed to anticipate medical emergencies before they fully developed, positioning himself strategically in corridors where he could observe without interfering. She had filed these observations away in the back of her mind, never quite understanding their significance. What Rivera didn't know was that Thompson's seemingly supernatural calm came from 3 decades of experience in military field hospitals, where life and death decisions were made under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Thompson had served as a trauma surgeon in the United States Army from 1978 to 2008, with deployments to some of the world's most dangerous combat zones. Thompson's military career had begun immediately after his medical school graduation from Boston University. Young, idealistic, and eager to serve his country, he had volunteered for assignment to military hospitals in active combat areas. His first deployment took him to a field hospital in Somalia during the humanitarian crisis of the early 1980s, where he learned to perform life-saving surgery with limited resources and under constant threat of attack. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Thompson had served in Bosnia, where he treated victims of ethnic cleansing and civil war. He had worked 18-hour days in makeshift operating rooms, often performing surgery by generator power with mortar shells exploding in the distance. It was there that he had developed his legendary calm under pressure and his ability to make split-second diagnostic decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Thompson's final deployment had been to Afghanistan in 2005, where he served as chief of surgery at a forward operating base hospital. At 57 years old, he was considered too old for combat zone deployment, but he had specifically requested the assignment because he felt his experience was needed where the fighting was fiercest. During his 3-year tour in Afghanistan, Thompson had performed over 2,000 surgical procedures, many of them under fire. The defining moment of Thompson's military career had occurred during a Taliban attack on his base hospital in 2007. When enemy forces had breached the compound's perimeter, Thompson had refused evacuation, choosing instead to continue operating on wounded soldiers, even as bullets flew through the operating room. He had saved 15 lives that night, working for 12 straight hours while the battle raged around him. For his actions that night, Thompson had been awarded the Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. But the experience had also taken its toll. Thompson had seen too much death, saved too many young lives only to watch them struggle with permanent disabilities, and witness too much suffering to continue unchanged. When Thompson retired from the Army in 2008 at age 60, he had returned to Boston with his wife Margaret, hoping to find peace in civilian life. Margaret had been his anchor throughout his military career, supporting him through multiple deployments and helping him process the trauma he had witnessed. They had settled into a quiet life in a small apartment, living on Thompson's military pension and enjoying their twilight years together. But cancer had stolen Margaret from him in 2015. Her medical bills had depleted their savings, and Thompson's pension alone wasn't sufficient to maintain their apartment and cover his own living expenses. Too proud to ask for help from military veteran services, and too old to be considered for positions that matched his qualifications, Thompson had swallowed his pride and applied for the only job he could find: custodial work at Sacred Heart Hospital. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had once been chief of surgery at a military hospital, who had trained dozens of young doctors, who had published research papers on battlefield trauma medicine, was now mopping the floors of the very type of facility where he had once saved lives. But Thompson had made peace with his circumstances. He needed work, the hospital needed custodians, and he could perform the job with dignity. For 3 years, Thompson had maintained this existence, living paycheck to paycheck but finding solace in the routine and the proximity to medicine, even if he was no longer practicing it. He would arrive each morning, complete his assigned tasks, and return to his small apartment, where he would spend his evenings reading medical journals to stay current with advances in trauma surgery, though he had no expectation of ever using that knowledge again. That Wednesday morning in October started like any other. Thompson arrived at his usual time, collected his cleaning supplies from the custodial closet, and began his routine. The hospital was busier than normal, with what appeared to be preparations for some kind of emergency response drill. Additional staff members were visible in the corridors, and there was an elevated level of activity throughout the building. At approximately 9:15 a.m., the hospital's emergency alert system activated. Multiple ambulances were en route with victims of a major construction accident in downtown Boston. A 20-story office building under construction had suffered a partial collapse when a crane malfunctioned, bringing down scaffolding and construction materials on workers below. Early reports indicated at least dozens serious injuries, with several victims in critical condition. Sacred Heart Hospital's emergency room immediately shifted into disaster response mode. Additional doctors and nurses were called in from other departments, operating rooms were prepped for emergency surgery, and the blood bank was alerted to prepare for massive transfusion protocols. The entire hospital became a coordinated machine focused on saving as many lives as possible. Thompson watched this transformation from his position in the emergency room corridor, where he had been cleaning examination rooms. He had witnessed similar scenes countless times during his military career, and the sight of medical professionals preparing for mass casualties brought back powerful memories. But he forced himself to remain focused on his custodial duties, knowing that his role now was to stay out of the way and keep the areas clean for the incoming wounded. The first ambulance arrived at 9:37 a.m. Paramedics rushed through the automatic doors with a construction worker whose leg had been crushed by falling concrete. Behind him came another ambulance, then another. Within 20 minutes, the emergency room was filled with injured workers suffering from fractures, lacerations, concussions, and internal injuries. Dr. Rivera was assigned to the trauma bay, where the most seriously injured patients were brought for immediate assessment and stabilization. Her first patient was a 42-year-old construction foreman who had been struck by a falling steel beam. The beam had crushed his chest, causing multiple rib fractures and potentially life-threatening internal injuries. As Rivera worked to assess the patient's condition, it became clear that his situation was extremely critical. His blood pressure was dropping rapidly, his oxygen saturation was declining, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. Standard trauma protocols weren't stabilizing him, and Rivera could see that without immediate intervention, the patient would not survive. Dr. James Park, the senior emergency medicine attending, joined Rivera at the trauma bay. Together, they implemented advanced life support measures, but the patient continued to deteriorate. His blood pressure had dropped to dangerous levels, his heart rate was becoming irregular, and his breathing was so compromised that mechanical ventilation was becoming necessary. During this medical crisis, Thompson continued his cleaning duties in the adjacent corridor. The intensive care unit was directly connected to the trauma bay through a glass-walled corridor that allowed staff to monitor multiple areas simultaneously. From his position, Thompson could observe the medical team's efforts to save the construction worker's life. As Thompson watched Dr. Rivera and Dr. Park work, his trained eye began to notice details that the younger doctors were missing. The patient's positioning on the gurney, the asymmetrical movement of his chest, the specific pattern of his breathing difficulties. All of these signs pointed to a diagnosis that the medical team hadn't yet considered. Thompson's decades of battlefield medicine experience had taught him to recognize subtle signs that could be missed in the chaos of emergency treatment. In combat hospitals, there often wasn't time for extensive diagnostic testing or consultation with colleagues. Surgeons had to make rapid assessments based on clinical observation and experience, and Thompson had developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose complex trauma cases within minutes of examination. From his position in the corridor, Thompson could see that the patient was suffering from tension pneumothorax, a condition where air accumulates in the chest cavity, compressing the lungs and heart. Without immediate decompression, the condition would be fatal within minutes. The standard diagnostic tools that the medical team was relying on wouldn't detect this condition quickly enough to save the patient's life. Thompson found himself in an impossible position. He could see that a man was dying from a condition he could diagnose and treat, but he had no authority to intervene. He was just a janitor, and medical protocol strictly forbade non-medical personnel from entering patient care areas during active treatment. For several agonizing minutes, Thompson watched as Dr. Rivera and Dr. Park continued their efforts to stabilize the patient using standard emergency protocols. They were excellent doctors following proper procedures, but they were treating the symptoms rather than addressing the underlying cause of the patient's distress. The patient's condition continued to worsen. His blood pressure dropped to critically low levels, his heart rhythm became increasingly erratic, and his breathing became so labored that it was clear he was fighting for every breath. The medical team was running out of options, and Thompson could see the frustration and desperation building in their faces. Finally, Thompson made a decision that would change everything. He abandoned his cleaning cart in the corridor and walked directly to the trauma bay entrance. The glass doors were closed, but Thompson could see the medical team working frantically inside. He took a deep breath, opened the doors, and stepped into the room. Dr. Rivera looked up in surprise when she saw Thompson enter the trauma bay. "Sir, you can't be in here," she said firmly but politely. "This is a restricted medical area." Thompson ignored her words and walked directly to the patient's bedside. His entire demeanor had changed from that of a subservient custodial worker to that of a confident medical professional. He looked at the monitors displaying the patient's vital signs, observed the patient's breathing pattern, and performed a quick visual assessment of his chest movement. "He has tension pneumothorax," Thompson said calmly and clearly. "Left side. The lung has collapsed completely, and the pressure is compressing his heart. You need to decompress immediately, or you're going to lose him." Dr. Rivera stared at Thompson in shock. The janitor was using medical terminology with perfect accuracy and confidence. More importantly, his diagnosis made complete sense given the patient's symptoms and vital signs. "How do you know that?" Rivera asked, her voice filled with amazement and confusion. "Because I've seen it 1,000 times, Thompson replied. "Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Use a 14-gauge catheter. You'll hear the air release immediately, and his pressure should stabilize within minutes." Dr. Park looked from Thompson to the patient and back again. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Right now, I'm someone trying to help you save this man's life," Thompson answered. "We can discuss credentials later. The patient needs decompression now." Dr. Rivera made a split-second decision based on medical intuition and the confidence in Thompson's voice. She grabbed a large-bore catheter from the emergency supply cart and positioned it at the location Thompson had specified. "Are you certain about this?" she asked. "Completely," Thompson replied. "I've performed this procedure more times than I can count." Rivera inserted the catheter between the patient's ribs and immediately heard the distinctive hiss of pressurized air escaping from the chest cavity. The patient's vital signs began to improve almost instantly. His blood pressure started to rise, his heart rhythm stabilized, and his breathing became less labored. Within 5 minutes, the patient had been completely stabilized. The crisis had passed, and what had seemed like certain death had been transformed into a successful save. The trauma bay fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors showing normal vital signs. Dr. Rivera looked at Thompson with a mixture of gratitude, amazement, and profound curiosity. "You just saved this man's life," she said quietly. "Who are you really?" Thompson took a deep breath and looked around the trauma bay at the medical equipment, the monitors, the organized chaos of emergency medicine. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was home. "My name is Dr. Marcus Thompson," he said. "I'm a retired trauma surgeon. I served 30 years as a military physician, with multiple combat deployments. I've performed over 10,000 surgical procedures, including several thousand emergency decompression procedures like the one you just did." The room fell completely silent. Dr. Park's mouth hung open in disbelief. Dr. Rivera felt her legs grow weak as the implications of what Thompson had just revealed began to sink in. "You're a doctor," Rivera whispered, "but you're working as a janitor. Why?" Thompson's expression softened, and for the first time, the pain of his circumstances was visible in his eyes. "Because sometimes life doesn't go according to plan," he said simply. "My wife died of cancer. The medical bills consumed our savings. My military pension wasn't enough to live on. I needed work. and this hospital needed custodians. It seemed like a fair arrangement. Dr. Park stepped forward, his earlier suspicion replaced by respect and embarrassment. Dr. Thompson, I apologize for questioning you. Your intervention saved this patient's life. We would have lost him without your diagnosis. No apology necessary, Thompson replied. You were following proper protocols. Sometimes experience provides shortcuts that protocols don't account for. Within an hour, news of what had happened in the trauma bay had spread throughout Sacred Heart Hospital. Dr. Rivera had immediately reported the incident to her department chief, who had contacted the hospital's chief of staff. By noon, Thompson found himself sitting in the office of Dr. Patricia Wells, the hospital's chief administrator. Dr. Wells had obtained Thompson's complete military medical records from the Department of Defense. She spread them across her desk as Thompson sat quietly in the chair across from her. The documents told the story of one of the most distinguished military medical careers in recent history. Dr. Thompson, Wells began, I have to say that your record is extraordinary. Silver Star recipient, chief of surgery at multiple combat hospitals, author of 17 published papers on battlefield trauma medicine, mentor to over 200 military physicians. You're considered one of the pioneers of modern combat surgery. Thompson nodded quietly. That was a long time ago. 3 years ago, Wells corrected. Dr. Thompson, with all due respect, what you've been doing here is not just wrong. It's a waste of an incredible resource. This hospital, this community, and the medical profession need your knowledge and experience. I appreciate the sentiment, Thompson replied, but I'm 72 years old. I haven't practiced surgery in over a decade. The field has moved beyond me. Wells leaned forward. Dr. Thompson, what you demonstrated today proves otherwise. You diagnosed a life-threatening condition that our emergency medicine team missed. You did it instantly, from observation alone. That kind of clinical intuition doesn't fade with age. It gets stronger with experience. Thompson was quiet for several moments, considering her words. Finally, he spoke. What are you proposing? I'm offering you a position as senior consulting physician in emergency and trauma medicine. You wouldn't perform surgery, but you would provide consultation on complex cases, mentor young physicians, and help develop our trauma protocols. The salary would be commensurate with your experience and qualifications. Thompson felt something stir inside him that he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The prospect of returning to medicine, even in a limited capacity, awakened a passion he thought had died with Margaret. I would need to update my medical license, Thompson said slowly. Complete continuing education requirements. Prove that my knowledge is current. The hospital will support you completely in that process, Wells assured him. Dr. Thompson, we need you. More importantly, patients need you. Thompson made his decision. I accept. The transformation that followed was remarkable. Within 6 months, Dr. Marcus Thompson had completed his license renewal, finished required continuing education courses, and assumed his new role at Sacred Heart Hospital. The man who had once pushed a custodial cart through the corridors now walked those same halls wearing a white coat with Dr. Thompson, Senior Consulting Physician, embroidered on the pocket. Dr. Rivera became Thompson's first official mentoring student. Under his guidance, she developed diagnostic skills that impressed even senior attending physicians. Thompson taught her not just medical procedures, but the art of clinical observation, how to see beyond symptoms to underlying causes, how to trust medical intuition while maintaining scientific rigor. Thompson's impact extended far beyond individual patient care. He revolutionized Sacred Heart's approach to trauma medicine, implementing protocols based on his combat experience that reduced emergency room mortality rates by 15%. He established a monthly conference series where he shared case studies from his military service, teaching young doctors how to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. The story of Thompson's remarkable journey from janitor to senior physician eventually reached local news outlets. The Boston Globe published a feature article titled The Invisible Healer: How a Hospital Janitor Became a Medical Hero. The story was picked up by national news networks, and Thompson found himself reluctantly famous as a symbol of hidden potential and second chances. More importantly, Thompson's story inspired other hospitals to examine their own overlooked resources. Several medical centers established programs to identify retired healthcare professionals working in non-medical positions and help them return to practice. Thompson's transformation became a model for recognizing and utilizing the experience of older workers in all professions. A laugh can chase away the shadows of a long day.
2 years after his return to medicine, Thompson established the Sacred Heart Institute for Combat Medicine, a training center where civilian doctors could learn trauma techniques developed in military hospitals. The institute became a national resource for emergency medicine education, training hundreds of physicians in advanced trauma care. At 74, Thompson showed no signs of slowing down. He continued to work 4 days a week at the hospital, teaching medical students, consulting on complex cases, and occasionally being called to the emergency room when his unique expertise was needed. He had found not just a second career, but a renewed sense of purpose. Dr. Rivera, now the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, often reflected on that Wednesday morning when everything changed. "Dr. Thompson taught me that experience is irreplaceable," she would tell her residents. "You can learn procedures from textbooks, but wisdom only comes from years of practice and observation. Never discount someone because of their age or current circumstances. You never know what knowledge they might be carrying." Thompson's small apartment remained largely unchanged, but he had added one new item to his bare walls, a framed photograph of the construction worker whose life he had saved. The man had made a complete recovery and had sent the photo with a note that simply read, "Thank you for seeing what others missed." This story reminds us that wisdom doesn't retire at 65, and experience doesn't fade with age. Marcus Thompson spent 3 years invisible in the corridors of Sacred Heart Hospital, but his knowledge and skill were always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. His transformation from overlooked janitor to celebrated physician demonstrates that society often fails to recognize the value of older workers, discarding decades of experience because of age-based assumptions. So now, I ask you, have you ever met someone like Marcus Thompson? Someone whose experience was overlooked because of their age or circumstances? Someone who had incredible knowledge but stayed quiet in the background, waiting for someone to recognize their potential? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us about the hidden heroes in your own life, the teachers who were more than teachers, the workers who were more than their job titles, the ordinary people who carried extraordinary wisdom. Your stories matter, and we want to help share them with the world. Every week, True Hero Stories brings you accounts of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. These aren't just entertainment, they're reminders of the potential that exists all around us, often in the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to True Hero Stories. Your support helps us continue finding and sharing these incredible accounts of human resilience, courage, and hidden potential. We have hundreds of stories waiting to be told. Stories of people who proved that it's never too late to make a difference. That age is just a number, and that sometimes the most important heroes are the ones no one notices until the moment they're needed most. And remember, you never know who might be quietly carrying a lifetime of experience right beside you. The person mopping the floors might once have saved lives. The security guard might be a decorated veteran. The elderly volunteer might have decades of professional expertise. Look closer, listen more carefully, and never underestimate the power of experience, no matter where you find it. Thank you for watching True Hero Stories. We'll see you in the next one.